Humblemud.
Yes, today is the day. My Golden Sun review is finally here. On October 1st, I put out a poll asking which of these 4 RPGs that I see mentioned most often in my comments should I play for the first time, and Golden Sun won by a big margin. Excited, I put about 8 hours into it once it became pretty clear that it was going to win, and then life and this channel got pretty busy, but I jumped back into it in December, and just a few days ago, I finished it. It was an interesting experience. Based on the near constant praise I've always heard about this game over the last 20 plus years and what you all were saying, I expected to like it. What I didn't expect was that playing Golden Sun through until the end took me down a path where I really had to rethink and challenge the perspectives that I've had on certain games in the past, and in the process, I legitimately learned a lot about myself. I know that sounds really weird or cliche, like maybe the true Golden Sun was the friends we made along the way or something like that, but I'm being real here. To be upfront, I did have a couple issues with this game, and obviously I know there are a lot of Golden Sun fans who are going to tune into this, so before you start pointing your Gaia blade at my throat, hear me out, because I think even the most die-hard Golden Sun fans are going to enjoy what I have to say overall. Just understand that much like Golden Sun itself, there will be a little nuance here. If it makes you feel better though, I'll tell you right now that I do think this game deserves to sit at this table in the lunchroom, aka my favorite GBA games. And for those who haven't played Golden Sun, I'll try to mostly share early game footage and talk very generally about the story beats I want to highlight that happen later within the game, so I think this is a video you can watch to get a feel for the game without being spoiled on all the surprises that Golden Sun has. With all of that out of the way, let's talk Golden Sun. With hindsight, it's easy to see how a game like this came about, though I think that nowadays Camelot Software Planning is mostly known for developing the various Mario sports games, for helping create Waluigi, and for making the game that this video is about, of course. Golden Sun wasn't the first RPG that they worked on. While they're kind of considered a second-party developer to Nintendo basically at this point, they initially cut their teeth with the Shining series of games. No, not that Shining. I'm referring to games like Shining Force 2 for the Sega Genesis. They'd also go on to make Beyond the Beyond for the PlayStation 1, and while that game in particular wasn't as well received, I think especially when we look at the battle scenes, you can clearly see how these titles were the progenitors for Golden Sun. I just think it's interesting to note that a company often seen as synonymous with Nintendo actually worked with Nintendo's biggest competitors first. Despite this, my first impression of Golden Sun was that in spirit, it's a Nintendo RPG through and through. From the first couple of hours alone, you experience what feels like a highlight reel or greatest hits run of the key moments from some of Nintendo's best franchises, which I really enjoyed. For example, you start off in the midst of a great thunderstorm, and while you can't just pick them up and smash them, the jars here are just begging to be inspected in case they have any goodies. So Golden Sun was already giving me some pretty strong Zelda: A Link to the Past vibes right off the bat. You also have this almost Metroid-style escape sequence from the game's introductory dungeon within the first hour or so. Your characters are adept at using psychic abilities referred to as synergy, and you can find these purple stones to recharge your energy to use those abilities, reminiscent of EarthBound psychic protagonists and the magic butterflies that briefly bathe the screen in a purple hue as they recharge your energy in a similar fashion. And thanks to the really interesting djinn creatures that you try to find and collect, there's an almost Pokemon-like element to the game. Plus, I think there's a little Mario RPG style humor in this game too, which I loved. And back to the topic of Zelda really quick, this game is notorious for its dungeons filled with involved puzzle sequences, which weren't really a thing back then save for a handful of games like Dragon Quest V, Lufia 2, or Wild Arms, and even today, it's pretty uncommon to see turn-based RPGs with a heavy puzzle focus like this. Couple these elements with the absolutely killer, I mean insanely good, top-tier soundtrack composed by Motoi Sakuraba, and probably the best graphics and effects ever achieved on the Game Boy Advance, and Golden Sun was already impressing me before I even got to the combat, which has a really nice hidden depth to it. But it's also within these opening hours especially where you're exposed to what I felt like was one of Golden Sun's biggest problems. And even if you love these games with all of your heart, I think you might be able to guess what I'm about to say, and that's the dialogue. Much like a few of the people in the comments have sometimes said about myself and the way that I make videos, Golden Sun often takes a little too long to get to the point. The characters react to just about everything that's said, which usually involves pausing the dialogue to see them emote in between sentences, and it just feels like the characters often use 5 or 6 sentences when they could have just said the same thing in 1 or 2. It also doesn't seem to matter too much whether you say yes or no when you're confronted with a question or have a decision to make. Another thing is that while I was initially very excited once I realized that Golden Sun combines Zelda puzzle dungeoning with JRPG gameplay, because I've personally always wondered why there never was a Zelda spin-off that went in that sort of direction, I now see some of the pitfalls that can arise from this specific genre blending because Golden Sun's pretty high encounter rate that, to be fair, was consistent with the RPGs of that time, can make for a sometimes frustrating experience when you're just trying to push that last log out of the way and you keep getting interrupted by drone bees. These two things, combined with the often unclear direction on where to go next, can really hurt the game's pacing at times. So by the time I got to the Fuchin Temple about 8 hours into the game, I was enjoying myself, but I also wanted to take a break. I then proceeded to get distracted by Halloween, Pokemon, Declines Drops, the Wii U, Namco Museum, and talking about the wind being green in JRPGs. Here's another example of green wind and Golden Sun for you, by the way. But making that green wind video actually put me in the mood for some Golden Sun again a month later. So I started it back up and I eventually made it to the town of Alton, which funnily enough seems to be many people's least favorite section of the game, but man, I loved it. The Alton Mine dungeons fix a lot of the issues that I had with the game's pacing because part of the puzzle solving revolves around redirecting the track so that you can get to where you need to go via the mine carts. And why is that important? Because you're not stuck in battles anymore when you're trying to just get things done. Backtracking is not a chore anymore. I really loved this whole stretch of the game. In addition to the Lamakan Desert area that you go to afterwards that a lot of other people also seem to hate, but as someone who really dislikes the Dusty Dunes Desert and the gold mine that you have to explore in EarthBound, basically the inverse situation of the Alton Mines and Lamakan Desert, I was really pleasantly surprised when I found that Golden Sun did the whole mineshaft and desert trope thing better than my favorite game of all time. So I rode a natural high again with Golden Sun for a few hours and eventually found myself leaving Calais in order to set sail for the town of Tolby. Now, even the Golden Sun Universe Wiki describes what follows once you're on that ship as a, quote, extremely drawn out series of cutscenes. And I also experienced my first personal difficulty spike in the game facing a certain boss, and as you can see in the screenshot I took to commemorate this, I just barely scraped by. I was also kind of curious here, like what would happen if you didn't survive this fight, because you're on a boat like T-Pain in the middle of a body of water and it's not like you can step off to go grind or level up or something. Well, apparently someone had this exact problem, and if you lose against this boss, you restart on the mainland as if the boat trip never happened, which does give you the opportunity to go get better gear, level up, or in this person's case, find some of the gin that they were missing, but you would then have to go back through all of those cutscenes and all the preceding battles once you felt ready to face the boss again. Kind of a bummer. And so it was here and in some of the areas following where I fell into a little bit of a lull with Golden Sun again. By the time I had gotten through the town of Tolby, I was about 17 or 18 hours into the game and was honestly starting to wonder if I even wanted to continue playing. I had a lot of dungeons and story ahead of me still, and I was playing this game pretty thoroughly as I had been told by a lot of people before I even started playing that there's a bunch of content and secrets you can easily miss in this game on a blind playthrough. So due to that and a little FOMO, I was doing basically every side quest and optional area that I could, which admittedly was probably adding to the burnout a little bit. But I began to get really conflicted because I wanted to make this video for you guys. This is what you all voted for and were excited to see my thoughts on, and I didn't want to let you down. It feels like the whole world has been singing the praises of this game for over 20 years, and at this moment, I was at odds with it, and that made me feel like maybe I was the problem. So in the height of my anxiety due to the fear of letting you guys down, letting myself down on all of that, I started researching a little to see opinions from people who didn't have quite as glowing of reviews for this game, just to maybe find something I could relate to, I guess. And it was when I dove into the shadows of negativity that I was able to finally turn back around and see the sun, all because of one little descriptor that I kept seeing come up. Baby's first JRPG. I hate that phrase. Not because it's an inherently negative thing, but rather because it's a phrase often used as a way to both discredit the things that a JRPG does well, while also dismissing someone's love for a game by telling them that the only reason they liked it is because they played it at an impressionable age and didn't know any better. So I have a question for you. Can you think of another cult JRPG with some unique elements to its combat system, in desperate need of a rebirth, that admittedly has some problems with its script, dialogue, and pacing at times, and is often dismissed by naysayers as a tropey JRPG, only having the cult status it has because it was a first JRPG for a decent-sized group of people? A JRPG that sold a lot better historically in the US compared to its mother country. Cause I sure can. As a longtime defender of The Legend of Dragoon, one of my favorite games of all time, and a game that I didn't get to experience in full until I was a young adult, seeing the all too familiar phrase of baby's first JRPG made me realize that I was about to make a serious mistake turning my back on Golden Sun. So I stopped sulking and overthinking, I transferred my save file back to my 2DS for my PC so that I could play this game in a handheld form the way it was meant to be played, stopped worrying about capturing footage, got under the covers and started playing this game the way I would have had I gotten it myself just a few days after my birthday in 2001 when it released in the States. Save for the device, of course, but the point was I got pretty close. And do you know what I did? I went on an imperial march to the end of Golden Sun. I wasn't going to dismiss it based on a couple issues that I thought it had. Being a person with a busy life in the age of social media and shrinking attention spans in the year 2024, I instead adjusted my mindset and became present with the game. I wasn't going to be another person to dismiss Golden Sun the same way I'd seen so many others dismiss my beloved Legend of Dragoon. So I went on to beat a certain optional dungeon to rescue a certain important character using a certain really cool ability that you obtain. I entered an area of disaster and started solving the secrets within an ancient tower. I went to yet another optional dungeon and had a really satisfying battle against the game's super boss, which is always one of the best parts of any good JRPG, and I kitted out my party to the best of my ability when it comes to their equipment. I'm also happy to say that I found all 7 Jin for each character. I also went up against one of the most hype final boss battles I can think of in recent memory, and I'm not going to spoil it here, but I also discovered exactly why everyone was telling me I would probably have a huge urge to jump straight to the game's sequel after this. And in those last 7 to 8 hours I spent doing all of this and seeing it through to the end, though I stand by some of the issues I think the game has, what we have here in Golden Sun was an incredibly ambitious JRPG for the Game Boy Advance. But more than that, in a vacuum outside of the relatively underpowered platform that it released on, Golden Sun is an incredibly solid JRPG on its own that does a lot of things so well in a way that isn't really done often in other JRPGs even today. If you learn to utilize the Jin properly, you can create really interesting character builds on the fly, considering that the combination and number of Jins you use in any given moment with a specific character affects their stats, class, and the synergies that they're able to use. It's always so fun to obtain new abilities and new summons in this game because everything is so well designed and over the top that it's enjoyable to see even on multiple rewatches. But if you do get sick of seeing the same animations over and over again, you can skip through a majority of them if you choose by just pressing the A button or switching up the Jins you have so that you have new abilities. And yeah, the encounter rate is pretty high, but this isn't a game you ever really need to grind on. If you're finding yourself in a rough spot, chances are there's a Jin somewhere nearby that you missed earlier who could really help turn the tide of battle for you. The game's soundtrack is full of earworms that will stay with you for weeks, and while the story isn't the most groundbreaking thing ever, I really found a lot of the characters, especially Ivan and Garrett, to be a joy on screen. I also really loved how sarcastic Mia could be at times. Additionally, playing this game as an adult makes you see certain characters in a different light than you probably would have had you played this game as a kid. There's some really subtle storytelling here that I've seen many people say went totally over their heads when they played this back in the day, and so the story is arguably better appreciated now. This is a game that takes you on a huge, sprawling adventure across multiple biomes and set pieces, and it's pretty wild to think that this was all taking place in the palm of your hands in 2001. While I don't usually mind playing GBA games on a big screen, I have to say that something about Golden Sun just hit different playing it on the go, on a smaller system. I think the graphics look their best on this 2DS screen here, and I found myself appreciating it a lot more than I did when I was blowing it up on the TV screen. While certain elements of this game are a bit on the easy side, I really don't agree that Golden Sun is a JRPG for babies. Especially compared to much simpler games like Super Mario RPG, for example, there's a ton of hidden depth to this game's combat, and you can essentially set your own difficulty based on how you build your characters. And if you really go to seek out everything that this game has to offer, I honestly think you may find some of Golden Sun's puzzles a bit harder than the ones in games like A Link to the Past at times. And before you say anything, I love Mario RPG and A Link to the Past, I'm not hating on them. But yeah, there's no way I'd have accomplished everything I did this year in Golden Sun back then when I was a kid. Even now I use the guide at times, especially to make sure I found certain secrets. I also think it's really cool that many of the synergies you learn along the way are often used in the environment. By the end of your journey, Isaac is pretty much forklift certified, moving around giant solid blocks like they're nothing, or knocking your character off the stage in Smash Bros. When I look back across my 25-ish hour journey with Golden Sun, only having 2 or 3 parts that I didn't enjoy is not that bad of a trade-off when I consider the many parts I was really impressed by. And as a whole, I do think that the last half of the game is even better than the first half. Playing Golden Sun and committing to it the way I did has made me rethink some things about games like The Witcher 3, which, try as I might, I've just never quite connected with as much as I wish I could. Now I'm thinking that maybe I should just give that game a bit more time. All in all, to answer the question that my video title presents, yes. I think Golden Sun is still golden after all these years, and I think it sits comfortably amongst some of the best GBA games of all time. And a lot of the issues I presented here with the first title were streamlined quite a bit with its sequel from what I've heard, so maybe that one will end up being my favorite in the series. Anyways, if you're still here, thanks so much for sticking with me on this wild ride, and as always, stay humble.